The fog rolled in thick as wool, clinging to the skin like breath on glass. The Appalachians rose around Thomas Mercer like slumbering giants, their ridges soaked in twilight. He gripped the steering wheel tighter as his rusted SUV groaned up the mountain road, tires grinding against gravel and half-buried roots. GPS had long since cut out. His phone was useless, no signal for miles. Just him, the road, and the thing that had been calling him. Thomas didn't believe in omens, but he'd been having the dreams for weeks now, dense woods, hollow songs, and eyes in the dark. He'd wake slick with sweat, heart pounding, the name of a town he'd never heard before on his lips, Ashstead. A forgotten dot on a century-old map, unmarked by modern charts. He'd found it in the archives of a college library, buried under census records and hand-drawn topography. Just one mention, one line, Ashstead, founded 1803. Pop EST 147. No contact since 1931. Something about that silence had hooked into him like a fishhook behind the eye. Now the trees closed in on both sides, their limbs clawing at the dusk. The road narrowed until it was barely more than a trail. He almost missed the sign, splintered wood, crooked letters, half swallowed by moss. Ashstead. No trespassing. He pulled over, engine ticking like a watch running out of time. The air was heavy here, thick with the scent of loam and rot. Something about the trees seemed wrong. Too tall. Too still. He opened the door and stepped out, boots sinking into the damp soil. For a moment, the silence felt like pressure in his ears. Then a crow screamed overhead and broke it. Thomas followed the path into the woods. A broken fence marked the edge of town, its posts carved with symbols he didn't recognize. Past it, the buildings stood like bones, gray cabins with slanted roofs and blind windows. Vines crept up the wood like veins. No signs of life. No movement. But the village wasn't abandoned. Not exactly. Something watched him from a second-story window. Gone before he could turn his head. His footsteps echoed louder than they should have as he walked between the houses. A church steeple leaned drunkenly to the left. A rusted bell hung silent in its tower. He passed a well, covered in wooden boards nailed into a star. The air smelled stronger here. Wet iron. Earth. Something sweet beneath it all, like flowers blooming in rot. Thomas stepped up to the church, its door ajar. He pushed it open with a groan of hinges and was hit by the scent of old incense and mildew. The pews were intact. Candles, melted to nubs, lined the altar. And behind it, carved into the wood, was a symbol. A tree, roots spread wide and curling down, like they reached into hell itself. A whisper, like wind through dead leaves, "He's come." Thomas spun. No one. But the air shifted. The hairs on his arms rose. Behind him, the church door slammed shut. He rushed back to the door, fingers fumbling at the rusted handle. It wouldn't budge. Locked from the outside, or something stronger was holding it shut. The light in the chapel dimmed, as though the windows had fogged over. Thomas turned around slowly, breath shallow. The symbol behind the altar seemed to pulse. Not with light, but with awareness. A soft sound broke the silence. A dragging. A scrape, then another. From beneath the wooden floorboards. He stepped back. The floor creaked. Another sound, this time unmistakable, fingernails or claws dragging along the underside of the planks. Closer now. Deliberate. Thomas moved quickly, ducking behind the altar. It offered little protection, but instincts took over. The sound stopped. Then a loud, splintering crack. One of the boards burst open behind the last pew. Something thin and pallid wormed up through the gap, a hand, slick with soil and too long in the fingers, groping the air blindly. The nails were black. Cracked. Sharp. He didn't wait to see the rest of it. Thomas grabbed the heavy brass candleholder from the altar and hurled it through one of the side windows. Glass exploded outward. He dove through, ignoring the sting as shards sliced across his jacket and cheek. He landed hard on the wet ground outside, rolled, and got to his feet in a scramble. The village was no longer silent. He could hear it now. Whispers. Soft, rhythmic. Like prayer. Dozens of voices murmuring in unison. Rising from the houses. The woods. The earth. He ran. Past the well. Past the sign. But the woods were different now. What had been a single trail into Ashstead had forked. 3 paths, then 5. Then more, spiraling into the forest like veins from a poisoned heart. He picked the leftmost and sprinted. Branches whipped at his face, roots grabbed for his ankles. Behind him, something followed. He didn't look back. Couldn't. Every part of his mind screamed to keep moving forward. Then he saw her. A girl. Standing perfectly still in the center of the trail. She couldn't have been more than 10. Pale dress, barefoot, long black hair hiding her face. Thomas slid to a stop, breath ragged. "Hey," he called, desperate. "Are you okay? You need to move, something's." She raised her head slowly. Her eyes were all black. No whites. No pupils. Just endless, glistening dark. She smiled. "I'm not lost," she said. Her voice wasn't hers. It was a chorus. Hollow and deep and wrong. "You are." The forest shifted again. The trail behind him disappeared. And the trees began to move. They groaned as their roots pulled free of the earth like limbs awakening after sleep. Bark peeled back like skin. Faces, not human, but vaguely shaped like them, pressed outward from trunks. And from the darkness between them, others came. The villagers. Or what was left of them. Gaunt figures with twisted limbs and bark-like skin, eyes black and empty, mouths stitched shut with vine. They did not run. They did not speak. But they came. Slowly. Unstoppably. Thomas turned and ran again. He didn't remember falling. Just a flash of green and sky and pain. He tumbled down a slope, rolling through leaves and brambles until he landed hard against something solid. A door. Set into the earth. Like a root cellar. Or a tomb. It was open. And from within, a single, flickering lantern glowed. He heard them coming behind him. No time to think. He dove inside and pulled the heavy door shut. Darkness swallowed him. The silence was worse than before. And in that silence, something began to breathe. It was not human breathing. It was too deep, too ancient, like air being pulled through a throat carved into the rock itself. Slow. Wet. Patient. Thomas pressed his back against the door, chest heaving, sweat mixing with blood on his brow. The faint lantern light flickered farther down the tunnel. Dirt walls closed in tight, barely wide enough to squeeze through. The ceiling dripped in places. Roots hung like veins from above, twitching slightly as if sensing him. He didn't want to move. Every instinct begged him to stay still. But staying still meant dying. Or worse. He pushed off the door and crept forward. The tunnel descended, winding like a spiral carved by hands that didn't understand geometry, each turn tighter than the last. The breathing grew louder as he moved. It wasn't just ahead of him, it was around him. Below him. Inside the walls. The light led him to a chamber. The lantern sat atop a crude stone altar. Beside it lay objects, bones, feathers, teeth strung on twine, and something that looked like a human jaw, clean and cracked in half. The floor was carved in a circle, lined with symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. In the center, a pit. It wasn't just a hole. It was absence. Like the earth had been eaten away. No bottom. No sound when he dropped a pebble into it. Just a pull, subtle, but irresistible. As he stepped closer, he saw the markings on the walls, hundreds of handprints in ash. Child-sized. Overlapping. Smearing downward toward the pit like they were dragged. He should have turned and run. But then came the voice. Not behind him. Not ahead. But in his head. You brought it back. Thomas staggered. What? He whispered aloud. Who? You dreamed of us. You followed. That's enough. You called us up. No, I was just trying to find the town. To understand why no one. The roots remember. The roots never forget. From the shadows behind the altar, something moved. At first it looked like a man. Tall, skeletal, dressed in tattered cloth that might once have been priestly robes. But his face was wrong, stretched too long, hollow in the cheeks, and those same endless black eyes, like the girl in the woods. Bark clung to his skin like armor. His hands were long, fingers stained red. He stepped forward slowly, dragging one foot behind him like it was broken. You're the last, he said aloud, his voice like gravel cracking in fire. The line ran thin, but the seed carried through your blood. Dreaming is enough. Now the circle can close. Thomas backed away. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, but you do. The thing tilted its head. You thought your dreams were just dreams. You never wondered why you were drawn here. Why you found this place no one else could. Thomas's stomach twisted. He had wondered. Late at night. In between the nightmares. You belong to Ashstead, the figure said, stepping closer. The last living branch. The final offering. When you return, the roots awaken. The hunger is fed. Behind him, the tunnel began to fill with the villagers. Silent. Watching. Their stitched mouths twitching with anticipation. Thomas turned back toward the pit. Its pull had grown stronger. His feet moved toward it without his consent. No, he said, shaking his head, trying to resist. No. I'm not one of you. I didn't choose this. You didn't have to, the figure said, now standing right beside him. The mountain did. Thomas screamed as something burst through the floor, a root, thick as his leg, slick and glistening with black sap. It wrapped around his ankle and dragged him toward the pit. He clawed at the dirt, screaming, grabbing the altar, the lantern, anything to hold on to, but the villagers stepped forward, gently peeling his hands away, their touch cold and final. And then, he fell. Into the dark. Into the roots. Into her. Because something waited at the bottom of that pit. Something old. Something hungry. And it had waited long enough. There was no falling, not in the way Thomas expected. The descent felt like drowning in air, pulled down through layers of cold soil and old memory. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Only the sensation of being absorbed, drawn deeper by tendrils that wrapped not just around his limbs but inside his mind. He saw flashes. A town, vibrant once. Children laughing. Bells ringing. Then rot. Rain that never stopped. People changing. Faces bleeding bark. Teeth falling like seeds. The village gave itself willingly. To her, she was the root. The mouth beneath the mountain. A hunger that slumbered deep in the Appalachian earth long before the first settlers carved names into trees and called it home. They had worshipped her as the tree beneath. The womb root. The endless maw. But the offerings had thinned. Until him. Thomas's body slammed into something soft, spongy, wet. He gasped, air filling his lungs again, but it stank of decay and sap. He was lying on what looked like a bed of moss, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Above him stretched the ceiling of a great cavern. The walls shimmered with strange fungi, glowing green and violet. Roots dripped from above like stalactites, twitching gently. Faces pressed outward from the earth, preserved like insects in amber, their mouths open in silent screams. He tried to stand, but something held him down. A figure emerged from the dark. The priest again, or what had once been him. His form had changed. Broader now. Rooted. Half of his face was bark. His chest opened like a flower, revealing a pulsing knot of flesh and vine. She welcomes you, he whispered. You dreamed her into waking. The seed called to you. I didn't ask for this, Thomas rasped, trying to free his arms. I didn't choose this. There is no choice, the priest said gently. There never was. Blood calls to soil. And you were always going to return to it. The ground beneath Thomas began to open. It split not like earth, but like skin, peeling back to reveal something underneath. A massive, beating root heart, surrounded by tendrils that moved like fingers. It pulsed in rhythm with Thomas's own heart, sinking, then overtaking it. No, no, he screamed, twisting violently. But they had him now. The tendrils rose and pierced his skin, not stabbing, but fusing. Root merging with vein. Flesh curling like parchment as her influence seeped in. His eyes rolled back. Visions poured into him like rain through a broken roof. He saw Ashstead in its first days, settlers kneeling before a tree so massive it blotted out the sun. Its bark bled when touched. Its leaves whispered secrets. They called it sacred. Then he saw what they'd hidden. The sacrifices. The children. The mouths sewn shut so their screams wouldn't wake the mountain too soon. The bargain had always been clear, one life for many. One seed each generation to keep the roots sleeping. Thomas was that seed now. The new voice filled his head, not words, but a sound like the shifting of stone, the creak of ancient wood. It wrapped around his thoughts, and where it touched, it rewrote. Memories cracked. Name dissolved. The roots accepted him. And in the village above, the trees exhaled. Ashstead bloomed again. The villagers rose from their stillness, mouths finally unsewn. Their eyes turned toward the woods, and they began to sing. A song of rot. A song of rebirth. From beneath the earth, the tree beneath stirred, fed by new blood. And her roots reached farther. Stretching, spreading. Searching for the next dreamer. Deep beneath the Appalachian soil, Thomas Mercer ceased to exist. What remained was hollow root, a name not given, but grown. The villagers chanted it in their rites, whispering thanks into the bark of their homes, etching it into stone, offering blood-soaked tributes beside the well once boarded shut. Where his body had fallen, a new growth burst forth, pale, sinewy, pulsing with dark sap. It resembled neither tree nor man, but both. Its roots twisted upward through the soil like a fish through flesh. Above, the village of Ashstead awoke. Cabins once dark flickered with candlelight. Doors opened on hinges unused for decades. The townsfolk moved again, not as humans, not truly, but as vessels, extensions of her will. Their skin cracked like bark when they smiled. Their breath fogged even in the summer heat. They spoke little. They listened often. Especially to the ground. Children played in silence, circling the well in strange patterns, whispering words in a language older than English or Cherokee, something remembered only by the forest itself. One little boy, no older than 7, leaned over the edge of the well and dropped in a polished stone. He waited. The stone never struck bottom. But he heard it, as they all did. The thrum. The heartbeat. Hollowroot lived. 2 weeks later, 50 miles away, in a town named Elkberry, the dreams began again. It started with one girl, Lena Shaw, 17, born to a quiet life and overworked parents. Her friends said she changed overnight. Became distant. Distracted. Her sketchbook, once full of cityscapes and friends' faces, now brimmed with drawings of towering trees and cavern mouths, all shaded in black and red. One picture in particular disturbed her mother, a crude charcoal image of a man with no eyes, bark for skin, and a chest that bloomed open like a flower. She drew it over and over again. Lena stopped eating. Stopped sleeping. She whispered in her sleep. Names. Places. Ashstead most of all. Her boyfriend, Mikey, joked about it at first. Maybe you found your creepy girl phase. But when she led him into the woods outside town in the middle of the night, barefoot, humming a song he'd never heard and couldn't forget, he stopped laughing. Especially when they found the stone. It wasn't big. Just an old boundary marker, maybe. But it was cracked down the middle and stained dark. Something pulsed beneath it when Lena touched it. Something warm. She whispered again, and the moss peeled back. Roots stirred beneath. Mikey turned to run. Lena stayed. That night, Elkberry went quiet. A mist rolled in and never left. The dogs howled at nothing. People complained of strange smells, like damp wood and copper. And several families packed up and left without warning, their homes left unlocked, their lights still on. The town's sheriff, Dan Harlan, found Lena's sketchbook abandoned in the middle of the woods, its pages torn out, fluttering in the underbrush like molted skin. He brought it home. Left it on his kitchen table. That night, his daughter, 7 years old, walked out into the woods while sleepwalking. They found her standing beside the same stone. She was whispering. To the roots. Hundreds of miles away, in a lab at a Virginia university, a botanist named Eleanor Raines examined soil samples taken from the Appalachian range. Her team had been monitoring fungal spore patterns, but recently, the data had turned strange. Patterns once chaotic were now aligned, almost rhythmic. Pulses in the mycorrhizal networks that didn't match any known growth behavior. At first, she thought it was an error. Then the readings spiked. Massive, sudden root growth in regions with no recorded planting or deforestation. Something was moving under the mountains, something coordinated. Alive. When she mapped the pulses onto a digital model, they formed a spiral. At the center of it, a single, blinking red dot. Ashstead. A town that didn't exist on modern maps. She tried to report it, but her emails bounced. The server flagged her data as corrupted. Then, 2 of her grad students disappeared during a field trip. Their car was found parked at the edge of an old trailhead, doors open, backpacks missing. The trail was unmarked. Just moss, stones, and an old wooden sign. No trespassing. Hollowroot's dream had spread. Not through technology. Not through language. Through soil. Through memory. Through blood. Every town it touched became quieter. More reverent. More rooted. Those who resisted were consumed. Those who listened were changed. And beneath the earth, the tree beneath writhed in joy. She had waited long enough. Now her seeds walked again. dreamers drawn to her like moths to the wrought light. Soon the world would remember what the Appalachians had hidden. She was not dead. She had simply been buried. Now, one by one, her children were waking. And they were hungry. Eleanor Raines didn't sleep that night. She sat alone in her lab, surrounded by soil cultures, mold samples, and eerily synchronized sensor data. Each pulse on the screen was timed perfectly, every 23 minutes and 40 seconds, across 6 separate locations. That couldn't be coincidence. Nature didn't work that way. Unless it wasn't just nature anymore. She stared at the blinking red dot at the center of the spiral, Ashstead. A place with no satellite imagery, no road access, no updated census records. The university's internal GIS system had flagged the area as restricted wilderness. But when she tried to access the state archives, her login was denied. Twice. On the third attempt, the screen locked her out completely. Access revoked. Someone didn't want her looking deeper. She left the lab after midnight, the streets outside bathed in sodium yellow and fog. Her car wouldn't start. Her phone flickered and died. She thought briefly about walking home, but the idea of moving through that mist, with no one else around, settled in her stomach like a cold stone. Instead, she went back inside. Pulled out the key to her private field locker. Inside was a single item she hadn't told the department about, a sample jar she'd taken from the Elkberry soil team 3 weeks ago. The contents were ordinary at first glance, black soil, fibrous root strands. But something about it had always bothered her. It moved. Not in an obvious way. Not visibly. But every time she reopened the jar, the strands had shifted, as if rearranging themselves into new positions. Tonight, under the fluorescence of her dissecting scope, the root strands aligned into a shape. A symbol. 3 roots. A spiral. A mouth. The same sigil she had seen drawn in the margins of the missing grad student's journal. Her skin crawled. She grabbed her notebook and began to sketch the shape. And that's when the light flickered. Not just over her desk, all the lights. The entire building. The hum of electronics fell silent. She stood, heart pounding, reaching for the emergency flashlight in her drawer. Before she could click it on, a noise stopped her cold. A whisper. Not outside. Inside the lab. She turned toward the soil fridge. Its glass door was covered in condensation. One word slowly formed in the fog. Seed. Eleanor dropped the flashlight. The whisper came again. Closer this time. She bolted from the lab, not stopping for her coat or her bag. Her shoes slapped the linoleum, every corridor longer than she remembered. The emergency exit at the far end loomed red and buzzing. As she reached for the handle, the alarm didn't sound. The door didn't budge. Behind her, something moved. A shape stepped into the corridor light, tall, thin, draped in something that looked like rotting bark. Its head scraped the ceiling. Its arms hung to its knees. Its face. There was no face. Just a hole. A vertical slit filled with teeth like tree thorns. It spoke without sound, the words forming in her mind. You touched her blood. Now you belong. Eleanor screamed and threw herself sideways into a supply closet. She slammed the door and turned the bolt. Her phone was dead, but she had a second one, burner, used for field research and data hotspots. She powered it on, praying. 1 bar of signal. Flickering. She dialed 911. The line connected. But what answered wasn't a dispatcher. It was breathing. Rhythmic. Wet. Patient. Then a voice. Ashstead. Come home. The line went dead. She was still screaming when the vines began to crawl under the door. Meanwhile, in Elkberry, Lena stood barefoot at the edge of the tree line, staring out at the night sky. Her mother had tried to lock her in her room, tried to pray, tried to call doctors. But the house had gone silent an hour ago. The shadows had grown long. Lena's eyes no longer held color, just that infinite black, like looking into the roots of the earth. She raised her hand. Behind her, the children of the town gathered. One by one, they began to sing. The ground trembled. The trees answered. Far across the mountains, Hollowroot opened his eyes. Roots snapped. Bark split. The chamber around him throbbed with power. The tree beneath had spoken. The next seed was ready. The spiral would widen. And soon, the forest would not stop at the edge of the mountain. It would keep growing. It would cover everything. 3 days passed. In that time, Elkberry disappeared. Not in the dramatic, explosive way that movies might imagine. No crater. No smoldering ruins. It simply quieted. A fog rolled down the mountain like a veil. Roads into town buckled under roots. Power lines split. Cell towers blinked off one by one. And the people stopped calling. Emails from the town's schools went undelivered. Packages were marked undeliverable, address not found. GPS routes rerouted around it as if the place never existed. The only people who noticed were the ones who had reason to care. Eleanor Raines was one of them. She drove for 12 hours without stopping, eyes bloodshot, heart hammering. The burner phone never rang again, but she kept it on the seat next to her like a tether to something real. Her mind replayed the thing in the corridor. The whispers. The vines that had begun to crawl beneath the lab door before she escaped out the window. Her shoulder still bled from where one had caught her, leaving a wound that pulsed darkly beneath the bandage. She had one name, now scratched over and over into her field journal in frantic, desperate loops. Ashstead. Every research lead pointed back to it. Every pulse in the root network. Every piece of vanishing data. She didn't care if it wasn't on maps. She'd find it. And when she did, she would burn it down. Ashstead was waiting. The village looked more alive now than it had in 100 years. The cabins were mended. Lamps glowed with steady, golden light. Gardens bloomed thick with red and black flowers that twisted toward any movement. The well no longer groaned, it sang. And Hollowroot stood in the center of it all. What had once been Thomas Mercer was no longer man. His form was humanoid in shape, but wrong in every other way. Limbs too long. Skin like wood grain slicked in sap. His chest had split permanently open, revealing the root-knot heart that pulsed with her rhythm. He spoke rarely. But when he did, the ground listened. At the edge of the woods, a figure emerged. Young. Female. Barefoot. Lena. She stepped into Ashstead's clearing as if pulled by an invisible tether, her eyes shining with black fire. The villagers, those silent, bark-skinned vessels of her will, bowed. Hollowroot turned toward her. She is ready, he said. The villagers echoed, she is ready. Lena said nothing. She walked to the well. Placed both hands on its edge. Closed her eyes. A long, low tone echoed from the bottom, an ancient resonance that made the trees shiver. And far beneath the earth, she stirred again. The roots of the tree beneath, already vast, stretched deeper, searching for more. Cities. Power lines. Rivers. Train tracks. Bloodlines. All of it could be claimed. All of it would return to the soil. Hollowroot stepped forward, vines writhing across his shoulders. Begin the sowing, he said. The villagers raised their arms. And the forest grew. Eleanor stopped her car 5 miles outside of where Elkberry had been. The road was gone. Swallowed in moss. Trees so thick and black with bark they looked ancient stood where houses should be. The air smelled of wet leaves and copper. Her hands shook as she stepped out, shotgun slung over her shoulder, a satchel of soil burner agents clinking against her hip. She wasn't a fighter. But she'd studied rot her whole life. And this was rot incarnate. She moved through the woods slowly, marking trees with red chalk so she wouldn't lose her way. But no matter how far she walked, the sun never rose higher than a dull, copper haze through the canopy. The birds were silent. Insects avoided her path. She felt watched. Then she heard it. Whispers. Not behind. Not ahead. Inside. Seed-bearer. Dreamer. Spoiled fruit. She pressed her hands to her ears, breathing hard. You don't own me, she hissed. Not yet. But you're ripe. And ahead, cut into the trees, stood the sign. Half-rotten. Covered in moss. Letters barely legible. Ashstead. No trespassing. She pushed forward. She would find the heart of this place. And she would bury it in fire. Back in Ashstead, Lena stood at the edge of the well. Her eyes were closed. Her mind stretched far and wide, seeing through roots and leaves and bones. She was the first new vessel in decades, and her connection was pure. She opened her mouth and sang. The spiral widened again. The next town began to dream. Eleanor crouched in the brush, eyes locked on the village ahead. Ashstead. It was real. It shouldn't have been, but it was. The cabins stood too clean. The grass grew in strange, perfect patterns, curling in spirals around the buildings. No wind, yet the trees swayed. And the people, dozens of them, stood motionless in a wide circle at the center of the town. All of them were facing a girl. Lena. The teenager stood with arms outstretched at the edge of an old stone well. Her hair was long and wild, her skin dusted in soil, her lips slightly parted in song. Even at this distance, Eleanor could hear the tune, low, mournful, and utterly wrong. It felt like decay given sound. Like something dead trying to remember how it once lived. Eleanor's hands clenched around her shotgun. This was the source. She felt it in her bones. The rhythm of the earth, the pulsing of the root signals, everything led to this moment. This girl. This place. She had brought accelerant. Charges. Her plan was crude but simple, get into the heart of the village, burn whatever the roots had twisted into being, and crush the network from the inside out. But now, standing here, watching the silent worshippers and the impossible life blooming in every crack of soil, the plan felt laughably naive. These people wouldn't stop her. But something else might. The earth trembled beneath her feet. Eleanor pressed her hand to the ground. It was vibrating, not shaking, not like an earthquake. A beat. A pulse. A heartbeat. She glanced up. Lena had stopped singing. She was looking directly at her. Despite the distance. Despite the cover. Their eyes locked. And Lena smiled. Inside Lena's mind, Ashstead bloomed in full. She no longer needed to see with her eyes. Her senses ran down every root and vine and fungus. She knew every heartbeat in the forest. Every lie whispered by the soil. She felt Eleanor crouched beyond the tree line, could smell the smoke of her chemicals, the heat of her blood. Spoiled fruit, the voice said again. But there was curiosity now. Hunger laced with something else. Challenge. Lena's arms dropped slowly to her sides. She turned from the well and began to walk. The villagers did not follow. They didn't need to. The woods parted for her. Eleanor backed up instinctively as the trees began to move. Not fast, just a subtle realignment, opening a path that hadn't been there a moment ago. The air turned colder. The song was gone, but its echo remained in her teeth, like a pressure headache that hadn't passed. And then Lena stepped out. Barefoot. Dirt-stained. Smiling. "Hello," she said softly. Eleanor raised the shotgun halfway. "Stay back." "I don't want to hurt you," Lena replied. "That's good. Because I do want to hurt you." Lena's smile faded, but only slightly. "You're not the first to try." "Where are they now?" "In the roots." Eleanor's finger brushed the trigger. But then Lena said, "You've heard her too. Haven't you?" Eleanor froze. "You felt the rhythm. The dreams. The calling. You don't know what you're talking about." "You touched her blood. When you opened the sample jar. You saw the symbol. She marked you." Eleanor's stomach dropped. The wound on her shoulder, where the vine had scraped her, throbbed in sync with the ground's pulse. "You're changing," Lena said. "That's why you came." "I came to burn this place down." "You came because part of you wants this." Eleanor stepped forward, raising the shotgun to eye level. "No," she said. "I came to end it." She pulled the trigger. The blast shattered the silence, the echo rolling off the mountain like thunder. Lena dropped. But before Eleanor could breathe, something happened. The ground opened beneath Lena like soft clay. Roots surged up, catching her body, cradling it gently. She didn't bleed. The bark of the forest pressed into her wound, and her body healed before Eleanor's eyes. Lena stood. Unharmed. "Fire won't stop us anymore," she said, her voice no longer hers alone. "The tree beneath is awake. She remembers the burnings. She's adapted." Eleanor took a shaky step back. Lena tilted her head. "She wants to meet you." The roots exploded upward. Eleanor turned and ran. She didn't stop running until her lungs felt like they would burst. But the forest moved with her, trees shifting subtly to funnel her back, again and again, toward the village center. The red chalk she'd marked the trees with was gone. Her bearings vanished. Every turn led her back toward Ashstead. And there, waiting at the center of it all, was him. Hollow Root. He raised his arms as she stumbled into the clearing, vines swaying around his form. "We are the rot that remembers," he said. And from the earth behind him, the tree beneath began to rise. Not all at once. But slowly. Terribly. Like a cathedral made of bone and root and endless, yawning mouths. And Eleanor finally understood. This wasn't a village. This was a womb. And something was being born. The tree beneath rose in silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of reverence. Of worship. Its trunk emerged slowly from the earth, wet with sap and threaded with sinew. It wasn't made of wood, not exactly. It was a fusion of bone and bark, of flesh and fungus. Faces were pressed into its surface like fossils in amber, hundreds of them, some human, others warped into impossible snarls, their mouths agape in voiceless screams. The roots that had once coiled through dreams now curled through the open clearing of Ashstead, pulsing in time with the massive heart buried somewhere deep beneath. Fungal blooms burst open along its limbs, each exhaling clouds of spores that shimmered in the amber light. Eleanor stood frozen. The shotgun felt useless in her hands. This was no longer a village with a curse. This was no longer even Earth, not as she understood it. This was a birth. A summoning. A reclamation of the soil's will. Hollowroot stepped toward her, arms outstretched. You could have joined us gently, he said. You could have dreamed your way home. I'm not yours, Eleanor whispered. You were never yours to begin with. Behind him, Lena appeared again, her eyes glowing brighter now, her hair streaked with thin, black roots that twisted down her spine. She carried no weapon. She didn't need one. Her presence was enough to make the trees bend toward her, as if pulled by gravity. We are going to feed the world, she said softly. Not with violence. Not with plague. With memory. With her. Eleanor's hand trembled at her hip, where the soil burner agents clinked in glass flasks. She had only 3 left. The others had shattered when she fell. You can still wake up, she said, looking at Lena, pleading. This thing in you, it's not you. It's not real. It's more real than I've ever been, Lena said. You think we've been twisted. But we've been remembered. The tree doesn't destroy. She restores. To what? Eleanor shouted. To this. A forest of corpses and puppets? A root system made of the dead. Lena blinked. She remembers what we forget. That all things return to the soil. That memory is stronger than flesh. And then Hollowroot raised his arms. The roots surged. Eleanor barely managed to roll aside as a thick tendril erupted from the ground where she'd stood a moment ago. She hurled one of the glass flasks into the base of the tree. It shattered, and fire erupted up the side of the trunk. The flames were blue, chemical, hungry. They hissed where they touched the bark flesh, and for a moment, the tree shrieked. Lena staggered. Her eyes wide. No. Eleanor pulled another flask, but the ground lurched beneath her. Roots wrapped around her ankle and flung her backward like a rag doll. She hit the earth hard, her breath gone. The last flask rolled just out of reach. Lena stepped toward her, fury now etched across her face. You could have joined us, she said. You were chosen. I choose myself, Eleanor gasped, dragging herself toward the flask, bleeding, coughing. I choose fire. She grabbed the flask. And then the world turned inside out. The explosion didn't come from the flask. It came from the tree. The fire Eleanor had started was spreading, not consuming, but infecting. Her formula had done something unexpected. Something perfect. The tree had adapted to fire. But not to its own memory. The chemicals had awoken a different kind of rot, forgetfulness. The tree began to decay. Not burn. Not break. Forget. Faces peeled from its surface. The song faltered. The villagers screamed, stumbling, clutching their heads as if something were being torn from them. Lena dropped to her knees, eyes wide in horror. She's forgetting us, she whispered. The tree beneath cracked from within. A splintered roar split the air as the trunk began to collapse. Not from the outside, but from the inside, as its very memory of structure faded. Roots curled in upon themselves. The spores turned to ash midair. Eleanor rolled clear as the center of Ashstead imploded. The well split open. And the thing beneath, the great, root-knot heart, was exposed, twitching and slick, blind and vulnerable. One shot left in the shotgun. Eleanor aimed. And fired. The silence afterward was total. Ashstead no longer stood. Where it had once grown was now a crater, filled with smoke and ash and the smoldering bones of trees that had never existed. Eleanor staggered to her feet, coughing, burned, soaked in sap and blood. Lena was gone. So was Hollowroot. The villagers had crumbled into bark and soil. But she remained. The last dreamer. The one who chose to forget. Weeks later, hikers would find her stumbling through the woods, half mad, half dead. She never spoke of what she saw. Never returned to the lab. Never touched soil again. But some nights, when the air is thick and the wind is still, she swears she can hear it. A heartbeat. Deep beneath the mountain. Waiting. The end.